Wow. I am back in Japan, but I spent some great time in Hawaii, and it really gave me fresh eyes on a place that I grew up. But after living and working on sustainability and sustainable tourism in Japan for so long, going back to Hawaii and seeing it with fresh eyes gave me a lot of great perspective on good things that Hawaii is doing that Japan could do, and good things Japan is doing that Hawaii could do. So that was my introduction. Sorry, you missed it. All right, let's start again. So, one of the things that really impressed me was doing a walking tour around Waikiki, and that was really fun. So, I did some more research on Waikiki. I did some tours around some of the old hotels, and I found some great information. One of the original hotels, the Moana, had a radio show called Hawaii Calls from 1935 to 1975. And they really introduced Hawaiian music and Hawaiian culture to the world through this radio show. And people around the world would listen and then be so impressed that they could hear the waves crashing behind. And so when I went to the Moana Hotel and walked around, I saw some of the old photos. They used to have street parking, just pay at the meter street parking along that busy, busy road in Waikiki now. And they've changed Waikiki so much, but they still have this strong heritage and these great stories of old traditions in tourism, going back all the way to the 1920s and even further back. So King Kamehameha even was a big fan of Waikiki, and he came and attacked the local forces in Waikiki, pushed them back to the mountains, pushed them all off the Pali Mountains. It was really brutal. But at that time, Waikiki was very lush and green and had all the beautiful water coming down from the mountain through all the fish ponds and the agriculture and out to the ocean. And that was the indigenous style of agriculture, which I really hope they will be bringing back. And one example that I saw of that was where I grew up in Aiea. There is a watercress farm called Sumida Watercress Farm. And this was a beautiful documentary film about the Sumida Watercress Farm right there in the center of Oahu. So Oahu is the busiest business center of the Hawaiian Islands. It's where the government is and most of the big businesses. And this Sumida Watercress Farm is amazing that it's still there, right in the center of the shopping district. When they started the farm in the 1920s, a Japanese American guy started it, and his family is still running it generations later. And it's just so beautiful to see this farm still in operation so many years after. I grew up seeing this farm when I grew up in Aiea and appreciating it, but now going back and seeing how it's in the middle of a concrete jungle just makes you appreciate it so much more. Also, the new rail system, the elevated rail system, is going right past Sumida Farm. So I really hope that when the rail starts and people look out the window at this beautiful green farm, grown naturally using nature's streams and keeping that water pristine as it goes through and out to sea is something that I hope people will realize how special it is, and maybe we can have more farms like this around Japan, around Hawaii. But isn't it great that it was started by a Japanese immigrant to Hawaii and now still family run? I think when I was in elementary school, we visited there and we learned about the farm and their dedication to keeping the farm open. I read an article that when the area started being developed, the owner of the farm, he was lobbying the government, and he was described as a real pain in the ass. And he said that's one of his points of pride, is that he was able to keep the farm open and to keep this beautiful land. Here you can see it in between the cars. Now that's where the rail is going to be, the elevated rail. It's a real concrete jungle, and Sumida Farms is an oasis of green. I also was happy to see Sumida Farms sold in the supermarket. When I was there about 10 years ago in Hawaii, a lot of the supermarkets didn't have any local produce. But this time I was able to buy watercress from Sumida Farm right there in Aiea. I was able to buy apple bananas, so the indigenous style of banana, which I think is more delicious and more tasty than the imported style. So Hawaii is still very dependent on food imports, importing about 87% of all the food that it needs. Still, even though some strides have been made in improving agriculture locally. But Sumida Farms, he had that idea that people need that good, healthy local vegetables. So that was really impressive to see. Oh, yeah, see? Yeah, I grew up in Aiea, and then out in the pineapple fields of Mililani for a while, which there's no pineapple fields anymore. But yeah, it was a great place to live, and we looked at Pearl Harbor almost every day. And then now, in contrast, I'm an American living in Hiroshima, going by Peace Park every day. So that's a really interesting contrast in my life, isn't it? So Sumida Farms is a great example. And as I said, the rail is going to go right next to Sumida Farms. The rail is another thing I was encouraged about. It sounds like it's going to go ahead and get started. At least part of the rail is getting started by the end of this year, 2022. And I saw them taking practice runs along the way. And we know in Japan how important mass transit is and good public transportation. And Hawaii, Oahu has about a population of 1 million. That's what we have in Hiroshima. But when I was on the roads in Hawaii, there was so much traffic, and it was really difficult to get around. They have this crazy rush hour time between 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. You start hearing so many cars at standstill, and then 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. So they really need a solution. And the bus, the local Hawaii bus, is fantastic, but the bus is stuck in the same traffic as the cars. And there are a lot of single riders. So the traffic problem is really something they need to address. Now, the elevated rail, the HART system, it's called HART, Hawaii Area Raised Transit, Rapid Transit. Sorry, I don't know the acronym, but it will alleviate a lot of the traffic problems. We in Hiroshima, we have an elevated monorail system. We have streetcars. We have the local train, and we have the Shinkansen train, and we have buses, and we have good cycle areas, and it's easy for walking. In Hawaii, in Oahu, it's not very easy for cyclists. You hardly ever see cyclists out there because there's very few cycle lanes, or the traffic is not very friendly to cyclists. There's only the bus as mass transit, and most people are very reliant on their cars. And outside of Waikiki or outside of Kailua or certain pocket communities around the island, you don't see people walking even. Very American in how most kids are dropped off to school by car. In Japan, my daughter just went to school by bicycle. So there's a lot that could be done on the very basic level in Hawaii without spending billions. There are billions behind budget and years behind the timeline for this elevated rail. But once they push through and get it done, it will be such a great asset to the local community as well as to visitors, and really elevate Hawaii, Oahu, as a destination appeal. So I'm rooting for that mass transit. Yeah, but in the meantime, what they could do on the ground is make protected cycle lanes, make it a bit safer for people to cycle around the island, encourage more carpooling, maybe encourage people to use electric cars and hybrid cars more. When I visited California years ago, they allowed people in the HOV who had cleaner vehicles, and this is years ago. So if you had a hybrid, you could, even if you're a single driver, you could use that HOV lane, the special during rush hour fast lane, right? Buses can use it. People with 2 or more people can use it, as well as they could add cleaner vehicles as well, which would be a step in the right direction. So yeah, in terms of tourism, again, when I was in Waikiki, I talked with a woman from Florida who is visiting, and she was complaining about the costs and the taxes on tourists. And it really made me realize that the visitors to Hawaii don't realize how expensive it is to live in Hawaii. That Hawaii local people are paying the highest taxes of anywhere in Hawaii. They have the highest utility bills, despite using 40% less energy than most people in the continent. So it reminded me that we need to find new ways to educate visitors a little bit better so that they appreciate the place that they're visiting and how special it is. So when I talked to her, I was mentioning, do you know that all of Hawaii's beaches and parks have public access? This is something that has been law for years and years. And in Florida, they have a lot of private beaches. A lot of rich homes or hotels have their own private beaches, but not in Hawaii. Everybody in Hawaii has public access. So even in the richest house areas of Lanikai, for example, you can access those beaches. They're not allowed to close it off. And that's an asset for local people, but that's also an asset for visitors. Hawaii also protects its wildlife. Like I said before, it has very forward thinking ideas about how to protect the environment, how to protect marine life. The energy targets are some of the highest. The per capita solar use is the highest and growing. I was really happy to see that a solar PV system, a 6 kilowatt system in Hawaii now, after subsidies, is about $12,000. That's 50% less than 10 years ago. That's amazing. And I checked in Japan, it's about the same price. So solar is one way that we can reduce our emissions, but also save money. So there's some real wins there for people, planet, and profit, definitely for community building. But when I was thinking about how we communicate, how do we educate the visitor a little bit more? Yesterday, I went to Japan's famous Miyajima Island, and I was listening to the announcement on the ferry, just like when I was going to Hawaii, and on the airplane, I was listening to the announcements. Now, why don't we have like a Hawaii promotion video that we show visitors before they land, which talks about how special Hawaii's flora and fauna, and how the high cost of living, and do something, have a good story, which is entertaining, but which also tells visitors about the special place that they're visiting, so they appreciate it more when they're there, and they don't balk at the tourist taxes. When I was on the ferry to Miyajima Island yesterday, and the announcement was just about safety, and I was thinking, what a missed opportunity. they could be saying, welcome to Miyajima. And did you know this about the island that is the island of goddesses? And tell us some interesting information before we arrive at this special place so that we appreciate it more, so that we're excited to get there. I think a lot of visitors to Hawaii, you're excited to get there. You're excited to get to the home of Hawaiian culture and surfing culture. We need to have that enthusiasm so that we appreciate where we're visiting. So, yeah, learned a lot about sustainable tourism as well by being back in Hawaii, and more excited about improving the narrative back in Japan for very special destinations, just like Hawaii should be as well. So when we talked about preserving and protecting wildlife, I did talk with a guy in Tottori, Richard Pearce, who is trying to save the giant salamanders. And seeing how well protected the Hawaiian seals were really reminded me of how little we hear about protection of wildlife in Japan. That this common public understanding and awareness of the need to protect our marine life and our environment. It was so refreshing to be in Hawaii and to see the public reaction, the media reaction to protecting the monk seals. And of course, you should stay away from the Hawaii turtles. Of course, you should stay away from the seals. And we don't want to disturb them. This is where they live. And I think we could do a bit more with how we talk about marine life and environmental protection in Japan as well. I have so many other things that I could talk about. I learned so much about visiting Hawaii and the old heritage buildings again. We talked about the mass transit, renewable energy a little bit. One of the things I'm really excited about is Hawaii's government now has 100% renewable energy target by 2045. It would be wonderful to see this kind of high, ambitious target in Japan and working towards it. When I was there in July and August, they were just starting to turn off the last coal power in September this year. That's great news for Hawaii. It was really exciting to be there at this transitional time. They are also on target to change all the buses to electric by 2035. And I rarely see electric buses in Japan or that conversation. But that will really help by reducing pollution, which is better for all the people on the street walking around. The quality of air will improve. I also saw a lot of free charging for electric vehicles at shopping centers and supermarkets. In Japan, it's still very difficult for charging your car. Difficult in the sense of also being expensive. So you can get a home charger like we have for about $200 or 20,000 yen for my electric car. And that's really convenient. Tesla also has a variety of superchargers network. But the main charging network is a system you have to pay 4,000 yen to just be a member of to use a month. And that seems really high, about $40, because charging a full charge on my supercharger system is no more than 1,000 yen each time. So having to pay for a different system, which is not as good, 4,000 yen a month, is really discouraging the electric car adoption by people looking for new vehicles, I think, in Japan. And I did get a tax break on buying a new car a couple years ago when I got an electric car, but there's no extra incentives for electric car drivers in Japan as far as I can work out. So they could improve that give subsidies or tax breaks. You could get cheaper rates on the toll roads, for example. There could be other incentives to spur on the commercial electric car adoption. But by 2030, Japan has the target of by 2030, no non-hybrid or non-electric cars can be sold in Japan. So that's a great target, which is upcoming. I'm excited to see how that is going to play out. Now, one thing I also saw in terms of sustainable tourism that Hawaii is doing is trying to control crowds a little bit better. So Diamond Head, hiking up Diamond Head has become too popular. And one way to control the crowds is they have a reservation only system for visitors. But local people can access the hikes and the park at any time with a local ID. And this reminds me of this idea that we have yet to see implemented in Japan of giving local people some kind of value for tourism, which Hawaii is doing really well with the kama'aina incentives and discounts. So in the tourist industry, you will see kama'aina rates, which means local resident rates, military discounts. In Oahu, we have more than 40% of the population and the land use is for the military. So they're a really big, important local market as well. But we don't have local discounts when people visit Miyajima. But why not? Why not Miyajima people getting 50% off anything that they want to do or buy? And why not give people in the area like a 10% off discount? Having that added value to the local people who are suffering the crowds and suffering the inconvenience of tourism helps to better balance the needs of locals with the appeal to the visitors. And I think visitors understand the need to give incentives to local people, especially when there's so much tourism and tourism is overcrowded. So I was happy to see that at Diamond Head. Diamond Head seems to be evolving. They're now thinking of how to separate cars and people, making it more pedestrianized, disallowing cars to come in so easily, making it easier for bicycles or people to come in on foot. I know a lot of people like to go hiking there. Is really nice to see this understanding of how to balance the crowds, but also to make it safer and more pedestrian friendly. I did rent a bicycle when I was in Waikiki and try to ride around. It wasn't easy. I can't say it's easy. The Biki bike system is very easy to rent. You get a code, you can rent a bicycle. It's about $10 a day, and you can put it back in any station. So that system we have in Hiroshima and other parts of Japan, quite easy, about the same price, about $10 a day. So it was nice to see that in use. But when I tried to ride outside, a little bit outside of central tourist area, it wasn't easy. There were no bike lanes. So that is definitely something that they could improve on to encourage more bike use, less car use. That should always be an aim. Plastic bags. 10 years ago, 2014, Oahu and I think all of Hawaii maybe banned plastic bags, 2014. And you saw a really forward-thinking shift away from plastic bags for any shopping. There was just a total ban that came down. But during COVID, you saw a lot of stepping back of the plastic bag ban. And I saw a lot of shops and restaurants doing takeout, and there was so much plastic waste. Suddenly, it seemed like 10 years ago. It was back with a force. It was way too easy to step back into old habits. In Japan, we're seeing the same thing. Last year or 2 years ago, we had a plastic bag ban. We are still seeing difficulty with adoption. People are just buying the plastic bags to use again. Uh, I would I would say it's a communication problem. People in Hawaii, people in Japan, they don't really see the reason not to use plastic bags. So we need a ban, but we also need better communication and public awareness of why it's better not to use plastic bags and what are better alternatives. Oh, hey, Z, I'm so glad you were here too. I'm not going to talk too much longer. I wanted to keep it around 30 minutes. But yeah, I have heard that during COVID, and I do understand this, it was really hard for small businesses to have enough staff to be switching to so much takeout, that was the reason Hawaii kind of stepped back with the plastic bag ban and didn't enforce it as much. But I really hope now that businesses are going back to normal, tourism is coming back, that we can go back to that strict plastic bag ban and have more public awareness of the reasons to do so and the value of doing so. I think one of the biggest shocks for me was also seeing the step back in recycling. About 5 years ago, when I was back, I noticed that a lot of schools and organizations were collecting cans and bottles at their schools and doing that recycling and getting that extra funding as a way to fund school projects or school supplies or trips. I didn't see that this time. I know that some people are still doing it, but the whole mixed garbage situation is a total nightmare in Hawaii right now. And this reminded me of when I visited Hawaii about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I first started living in Japan. And I made the big switch from going from America to Japan, and America had all mixed garbage 25 years ago everywhere. And when I came to Japan, they were separating their garbage. They kept the glass and the metal and the paper separate from the burnables. And so there were about 4 categories that you had to separate your garbage. When I went back about 5 years ago, I was seeing more separation. People were separating out the burnables from the recyclables. But this time I see the mixed garbage again. And it's crazy in 2022 that people aren't at least separating their garbage better. One thing that would improve in Japan and in Hawaii for sure is having composting. It's a no-brainer. In a population of 1 million in San Francisco, they have 100% composting mandatory rule, and they reduced their total waste by 30%. In Kamikatsu, the zero waste town in Japan, a population of 1,500, they made mandatory composting for everybody, has to deal with their own kitchen waste. Immediate reduction in 30% of all their garbage problems. In my own family, when I came back from Kamikatsu and we had mandatory composting in my house, we saw an immediate reduction of 30% in our household waste. So this is a common immediate reduction of the burden of the taxpayer on paying for the garbage infrastructure if you install a mandatory composting system. Yeah, that's so true. People are disconnected from the reality outside of their immediate lives. They just throw away and forget, go on with their day. That is so true, Z. And I think until you see an alternative, you don't really even think about it, right? Like it's just like you said, you throw it in the bin and it's gone. You don't think about it anymore, right? But when you realize that the landfills in Hawaii are filling up, the incinerator is not the best solution. Same in Japan. The incinerator in Hiroshima is beautiful. It's $1 million designed museum of garbage, but they are burning a lot of mixed material, including plastic. So the ash cannot be reused. If it was just paper and burnable material, not plastic, you could reuse the ash. You could compost that ash. But same in Hawaii, because there's plastics in the incinerator, you have to landfill that ash. And the burden that we're putting on future generations by creating more landfill problems, by shipping garbage, still, America and Japan both shipping plastic waste still to poor countries in Asia because we can't deal with it. Well, they can't deal with it either. And it's so unethical. And it's creating a lot of the ocean plastic problem, which we are suffering in Hawaii and Japan. So it's coming back to us. It's not going away. We are just creating more problems for the future. So this plastic issue in both Hawaii and Japan is definitely ongoing and something we need to deal with more. One other sad thing about the plastic problem, in Hiroshima, we have a big oyster industry, and each of the floating oyster beds, like I saw on Miyajima Island on the way, in the Seto Uchi area, the Seto Naikai, the inland sea, we have so many thousands of these floating oyster beds, and each oyster bed has 25,000 of these plastic tubes and styrofoam, which is separating the oysters from each other in the floating beds. And they stay in the water for 2 to 3 years. And during that time, a lot of them knock off from the waves or from boats passing. When we do cleanups in the area, we pick up these plastic tubes and styrofoam by the thousands every time we pick up. So many. And I was so sad to see them on the beaches in Hawaii as well. So this is not only a Hiroshima problem. This is not only a Japan problem. This is a worldwide problem. Any plastic that we're getting out that we're still using is becoming a huge ocean plastic problem. And for places like Hawaii and Japan, which depend on tourism, this is really bad branding when a lot of your beaches are covered in tiny pieces of plastic. And I saw actual tubes which look identical to the tubes we see in the oyster industry in Hiroshima. And it's just shocking to see it there. Yeah. 2 miles away from the biggest landfill in Michigan. Oh my goodness. Yeah. And that's another issue that I was thinking a lot about this time. They did a mental health survey on Oahu. And of course, as expected, they found that people who live in areas near landfill, near sewage treatment centers, near the coal power plants, they have much more mental health problems and emotional difficulties, of course. So it's everybody's benefit, right? It's the common good to have these facilities. But how can we compensate people who live near it? And how can we make the situation better for all people? And that really should be something we're at least talking about, right? Yes, the Ocean Cleanup Project is fantastic. Started in the Netherlands, and they're doing some great work to pick up a lot of the plastic out of the ocean. But what they're doing is at the end stage, and the biggest effect we can have is at the start stage. So if we can find a way to turn off the tap and stop putting new plastic into the environment, and then we don't have to worry so much about trying to clean it up at the end stage, which is so much more difficult. And it's already created so much damage. The ocean is so important. So for Hawaii, for Japan, we are both island areas, and we get all of our world's oxygen. So much of our oxygen comes from the ocean, and a healthy ocean. The ocean is not too big to fail. We need to take care of it. So this is one of the big takeaways from being in Hawaii, for sure. So I've talked about a bunch of issues. I didn't have as many graphics as I had hoped today to set up. I'm a little bit out of practice, as you can tell. I hope to be better organized next time I do this, but I'm hoping to have these discussions about Hawaii, Japan, at least once a month, because I feel like my heart is torn in two, and I have lived so long, had my career for so many years in Japan, but I feel passionate and so excited about what's happening in Hawaii as well. So I hope it's not too bad, too long until I can go back and see family and friends, but also to learn from Hawaii and the great initiatives happening there, and to take some of the knowledge that I'm seeing in Japan and apply ideas from Japan and Hawaii and back and forth, because there is so much wonderful innovation and ideas happening in both places. Yeah, cradle to cradle, definitely something we should be thinking about. Salmon farming, yeah. Fish farms, big environmental problem all around the world. We thought we were creating more sustainable seafood by adding fish farms, but we're creating more problems and less sustainable fisheries, definitely. I had a good conversation with um, the author of the book Outlaw Ocean. I'll put the link below, Eric. That was a great conversation. And he talked about so many issues with the fish farms and areas which used to have more than enough local fish. And then big companies come in from other areas and take all the local fish, make fish meal, and then send it around the world to feed the fish farms. It's just not sustainable solution at all. It's crazy. It reminds you of the children's book, The Lorax, right? How you're overusing all your resources until nothing. Some people refer to it as racing toward the cliff, trying to make short-term profits, but that's not what we expect from ethical businesses now. That's not what we need in our societies and in our governance in 2022. That is for sure. I do have a great interview and introduction of a fantastic organization called Reuse Hawaii, where I visited when I was on Oahu, and they're doing some great stuff with deconstruction. So instead of destroying a house before you rebuild or remodel, they send their group in and they take out the usable resources and they sell it at their warehouse. But they're also changing the idea of how we remodel, how we rebuild, and what value these materials have in old houses and old buildings before we destroy them. And I think this is a concept we definitely need more of in Japan. We see so many beautiful old houses which are being destroyed. Most of America is seeing the same thing, but we have so much value in these old buildings. And I think, Eric, you mentioned that you're coming to work with a group that's rebuilding old Akiya, old Minka houses in Japan. So that'll be exciting to see what you're doing when you come to Japan. Excited to follow your story a little bit more. So I'm going to leave it there for today as a good way for me to get back on the horse, start this talk show again. Thank you guys so much for joining. It's been wonderful talking about some ideas in tourism, some ideas in sustainable management and development from Hawaii and Japan. And hopefully you can join next time. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.